On today's episode of Recliner Reviews, we're talking about a weed movie, which is its own genre. And this movie is called...
I remember when a dime bag cost a dime.
Half-Baked.
I'm sorry! Do you know this, as legend goes, I don't know how true this story is, but according to Neil Brennan, this movie is literally a half-baked idea. This is what he said, maybe he's stretching the truth a little bit, that Dave Chappelle promised... maybe it was Universal, I don't remember which company.
In 1997, Dave calls me and goes, hey, if Universal reaches out to you, tell them we're writing a weed movie together.
And they just put it off forever, and they came up with this at the last minute and like threw it. It's literally a half-baked idea, which I think is funny because, you know, half-baked.
That's super weird because Chappelle has been on like the Inside the Actor Studio, and he said that he's unhappy with the way that the final cut turned out because he wrote something that was totally different. He wrote a movie that was totally different. And what this ended up becoming because of the final cut was, quoting him, a weed movie for kids.
Well, I think it was always a weed movie, though.
Well, yes, but like, I think what it turned into because of the final cut, he says is different than what he wrote. Now,
I'm sure that's true, too. I'm just saying, like, not a lot of thought went into, according to the...
But it would seem like if there not a lot of thought went into it and like he just kind of like rushed through it, he wouldn't be so defensive and be like, I'm unhappy with the way this turned out.
But
right?
I think I've heard him say too before that he has been unhappy and kind of not ran away from Half-Baked, but was never necessarily proud of the movie in the years after. And I actually think this movie got better with age. Not necessarily because we think it's funnier, but because of Dave becoming more famous.
Yeah.
I think people look more fondly on the movie than they might have 20 years ago. Because I think it never got good reviews when it came out. Like, critically awful. But I think people talk about it in a more positive light now, in part because of him, and also because the reputation it had was that it did suck. And now people watch it and it's actually kind of funny, and like it doesn't suck that much.
I don't know. So much of the stuff that he's done has been gold, right? And that's not to say that this movie isn't gold, but like it's a very different type of humor.
I would say it's not gold. I think I don't hate it, but it's not good. I understand why he would be unhappy with how the movie came out.
Yeah.
And also, Chappelle's career is interesting because we think of everything he's ever done as like magnificent. But he started doing stand-up when he was like 14. And throughout the 90s, it's a lot of failure. It's a lot of bit parts. And You've Got Mail. We talked about how he turned down the role in Forrest Gump. Yeah. And that's how he ended up in You Got Mail, because Tom Hanks got him that role. He was in Con Air in a smaller role. This movie didn't turn out well. It wasn't until Chappelle's Show, which was 2003, that all of a sudden, I mean, he had great comedy specials, but that he really broke through into the mainstream.
Yeah.
So, and he was working a lot before then.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think a lot of people watch this movie and they laugh at it because, again, there's relatability. But even relatability for somebody who maybe doesn't smoke weed, the whole dating thing, right? There's some relatability there about like meeting somebody for the first time and it's so different now, right? Like you've got all your Hinges and Grinders and whatever, that it's not like, oh, I see this girl, she's really hot, I'm gonna like go up to her and ask her out and then like sit by my phone, like you text, like whatever. It's very different now, but there's still like, how do you impress somebody on the first date, right? And how do you impress somebody on a date when you don't have any money? Like, how do you make that work, right?
Also, the whole plot of, like, trying to get their friend out of jail, it's, there's something about a plot of, like, needing to raise money or the goal is really easy to set up for comedy. Yeah. It's like, in Dirty Work, they're trying to save Artie Lang's dad, like get money for his surgery. Yeah. It's just like setting up that goal. It doesn't matter that it's about weed, like throughout the movie. It's a pretty common comedy setup. Yeah, I agree. So I think beyond weed, this is kind of just like a run-of-the-mill sort of, I don't know if I'd say slapstick. Just it's definitely dumb. And I don't even know if it's dumb in a smart way. It's just dumb.
Dumb.
And if you can just kind of bite your tongue and like not, if you're sitting down to watch cinema, you're going to be disappointed. But there's room for movies where you're sitting down, maybe you're having an edible yourself, and you're just going to laugh at some of the gags in the movie.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talented people in the movie too.
Yeah,
some of them
for sure.
that ended up being actually in Chappelle's show. So I mean, it's enjoyable for sure.
Yeah.
It's just not, I understand why Dave Chappelle is not touting this as one of his achievements, but I think they joke about it now. Like Neil Brennan told that story that I mentioned in the outset at Chappelle's Mark Twain Award ceremony. Because I think now you can laugh at it because after this movie, it wasn't like your defining thing in your career. You went on to do Chappelle's show. You had a bunch of stand-up specials with Netflix. Like you're one of the greatest comedians of all time. It's like Louis C.K. made Pootie Tang. Did you ever see Pootie Tang?
I did see Pootie Tang.
We should do that movie. If that was the defining moment of his career and he never got off that, he would be have nightmares about Pootie Tang. But thankfully, more came out of his career than Pootie Tang.
Yeah, and he's got nightmares about other things too. That's not just a movie. But so I think that again, talking about relatability. So there's a couple of things, right? The line with Jim Breur where he's high and he's, "Who's coming with me, man?
Who's coming with me, man?"
And like, I feel like for me, that was a line that got thrown around a lot in college.
Really?
Just for anything, like in that intonation, in that voice, in that everything. Like, I'm going to the bar. Who's coming with me, man? And be like, all right, let's go. Like, it's dumb.
That was a pretty good Brewer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Jim, I hope that you don't take offense to that. That's, if you're watching.
Wait, so how did you receive this movie when it came out? Because I have a different perspective of watching this after becoming a Chappelle fan, after Chappelle's show. Like, probably saw it for the first time late thousands.
Saw it before Chappelle show. Pretty much like, not right when it came out. I didn't see it in the theaters. Saw it shortly thereafter. I know we just talked about this before starting the filming, but like, I grew up watching Cheech and Chong. Cheech and Chong, Up in Smoke. Watched some of the other ones too, but that's another discussion for another time. But grew up watching Cheech and Chong, Up in Smoke. And so like, a lot of that type of humor and the like weed jokes that are getting kind of bandied about, there's a lot of similarities between the two movies. And so like watching this movie, it was like a more up-to-date kind of Cheech and Chong.
Yeah.
And
That's fair.
like there were a lot of lines that I found particularly funny that maybe you might not find funny at all. So like in the scene where Chappelle is playing the like weed guy, I can't remember the name, right? Like where he's the famous dude who does the video called Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah.
So that guy, that character, after he smokes his weed and is high as a kite, and now he's confessing everything, right, about himself. And he has a line in there where he says,
"Doctor said I need a backiotomy."
That line is hilarious to me and a bunch of my friends because just before this movie came out, I actually had back surgery. And so like that they would throw that out at me. Like say like just dropping the like backiotomy. Like, you better be careful, you had a backiotomy. Like, you don't want to get another backiotomy. And so like there's like that line was like funny. Like, and it has lived on forever. Like whether or not the whole movie is great and quotable, it's not. And it's not. But like it's things like that like continue to live on with like my group of friends, right? The whole backiotomy thing is one example. Or like talk about again the relatability, the snack scene.
Also celery, grape jelly, Captain Crunch with the little crunch berries, pizzas. We need 2 big pizzas, man.
Yeah, that's
like I don't know. You went to college after me, and so it was a little bit of a different time. But like when I went to college, like it was a big deal if somebody. First off, if somebody had a car, right? And then if somebody had that car and was like, I'm going to go to the grocery store, I'm going to go to Walmart. Well, I started school in Des Moines, so like going to the Walmart was like a big deal. Like, I'm going to go to the Walmart. The difference being in this movie, it's like, Jim Breur starts, we need Funyuns.
With some dip, man. Some beef jerky, some peanut butter, get some Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars.
There would be people being like, oh, you're going to the store? Get me this, get me this,
Yeah.
get me this, right? I didn't associate with that because it was always, if somebody's like, hey, I'm going to the store, does anybody want anything? I'd be like, I want to go. Because, like, if I'm going, then I'm able to be like, I want this. Like, I'm going to get these things rather than being like, I want this. And then somebody's like, they come back with the food and I'm like, man, I really could have gone for a pizza puff.
I gotta get me a pizza puff.
Instead, right? Like, if I'm at the store, I can choose that pizza puff. So, like, the snack scene, again, I don't know if that resonated at all.
I mean,
with...
I went to school in a city, and we two of my roommates had cars, and we would like make a trip to the Pick and Save sometimes, and I would go and load up on the essentials like Cheez-Its and PBR. But no, I kind of know what you mean. But I also the snack scene I associate with, and this is a point that it's like kind of coming to me right now while we're talking about this movie. I think part of the reason, so I think it's funny that he like the list of snacks that he rattles off too, because a lot of it's like shitty stuff you eat when you're high.
Yeah.
But I think part of the reason that, like we were talking off camera about how I'm not a huge fan of Cheech and Chong, even though I'm a fan of comedy from the era, I think for the most part, I grew up in an era where marijuana was progressively being normalized, and now it's extremely normal. I'm high right now. To the point where a movie about a couple guys being like, fuck, need Slim Jims, like, it's silly, kind of, but like people that are openly getting high all the time, or like now you can go buy gummies at the store in my neighborhood and get high. Like, it's just.
But there's a difference now, right? Like, yeah, it's normalized, and now but like everything's dosed, right? And everything is very specific. So it's like, if I'm gonna get high, like maybe I'm just gonna pop an edible of whatever, right? As opposed to in this era, which is kind of what you're getting towards, right? It's a little bit of a mixed bag. If you got some weed, like, it could be really, really powerful stuff.
Right. You don't know what it is.
Or it could be like just mediocre or whatever.
Which is why
so,
it's
like,
good that it's legal and you know what you're buying.
Right. I mean, but that's the difference between like the Cheech and Chong and Half Baked eras, right? As opposed to when you got to college, into your era, right? Into like now, right? It's different. It's a different discussion when you're talking about weed, right?
It 100% is, but the point I was going to make was, I think the idea of two guys being high isn't as funny just naturally, because like I know two guys that are high at any given moment. So, but like my dad loves Cheech and Chong too, and I think if I watched it in whatever year the first movie came out, 70s?
70s,
Yeah. I would be like, this is fucking hilarious. This is like, oh my God, these guys are so stoned and they're doing all this dumb shit. But now it's that just being high and doing something dumb, I don't think is funny. Because there hasn't been a real, correct me if I'm wrong, it hasn't been a real stoner movie in some time, because it's just a thing now. It's like, I watched I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry recently. That came out like 08, 07. That, I mean, obviously there's a lot of reasons why that movie wouldn't come out in 2022, but the idea of two guys just being gay isn't funny.
Yeah.
And married.
Yeah. I agree. No, I mean, when it's normalized, it's not a big deal. That goes to the like, kind of on a similar vein, but a little bit different, right? When you go to college and like now here's alcohol available to you. Like in high school, it's a little more difficult to come by. You have to have somebody that's getting you all the things, as opposed to like you get to college and it's pretty much just there, like all the time, right? Especially if you are friends with people who are like seniors or juniors who are 21, and it's just like, it's here. They're here. You don't have like that Animal House, right? Where it's like Animal House, so we're wasted all the time and doing dumb shit and whatever. Like, you just don't have that. And I think that's part of it, because the prevalence of alcohol, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. Like, as marijuana has become more prevalent and acceptable,
it's not taboo.
Yes.
Because it's funny for Cheech and Chong or Dave and Jim Breur and company to just be high when it's more taboo.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, look what they did. And now it's like, oh my God, look what they did. I did that last weekend.
Yeah. Well, by the way, can I just make a mention that Jim Breur was actually not high through the movie with the exception of one scene.
Really?
Yeah, there's only one scene.
Because he's a big pothead.
Yeah, there's only one scene that he was actually high. And that was at the end of the movie where they're dealing with the actual drug dealer. He wanted to reshoot his scenes, and Jim Breur was let go for the day. And Chappelle had given him some weed. And so Jim Breur went off, and he went and he smoked some weed. And then they called him back and were like, hey, we need you to reshoot some of these scenes. And so he had to reshoot a couple of scenes where he was just actually high, and actually really, really high. Whereas most of the movie, he's not high at all.
That's how you should do a weed movie now, is just make it all improv and have everybody high.
Weed is tight. Weed is tight. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Weed is awesome.
Well, I mean, that could be good and it could be bad. It just depends. It depends on who it is, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, sometimes...
Well, it's like drunk history. Like, people actually get drunk for that. If you do, like, a high, not high history, but, I don't know, something where you have to...
I don't know. I've known people where there's a difference between the humor that they have when they're sober or maybe drinking or whatever, as opposed to when they're high, that they think something is a lot funnier than it is.
Oh, I think everything's way funnier when I'm high.
But that kind of ruins it sometimes.
Yeah.
Where it's like you think something's hilarious, right? Like there have been times where I've thought something has been really, really hilarious, and it's not at all. Like you look back at afterwards, and it's like that was not funny. Like I thought it was funny. It's not funny. I don't know if you felt the same way.
I mean, I watched Idiocracy high a few months ago. Almost made my Laugh Hall of Fame. Actually, maybe it should, but it's like an asterisk. It's like the Barry Bonds. It like took steroids, because it was one of the hardest I've laughed. But I've seen the movie like 8 million times. But this is the hardest time I laughed because I had like 2 edibles.
Okay. So note to self: if I want to watch Idiocracy again, I should watch it.
Yes,
high?
yeah. Okay. It's an amazing experience.
Okay.
When the Costco pulls up and it shows a big thing, it's so good.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that would be hilarious to me because, I mean, like I've said to you that every time I go to Costco, which I go to Costco every week, right? Like when I'm doing the checkout, the self-checkout counter always says to you, is like, thank you for coming to Costco. And I always say to it, I love you. Every single time.
Do you have anything else in the movie?
Just 2 more things. It's hilarious to me that Dave Chappelle calls him, he's a janitor, right? But he calls himself master of the custodial arts. Like, I feel like at this time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody was looking for ways to reframe shitty jobs with words that, like, fancied it up, right?
Yeah,
so, like master of custodial arts is
the retired garbage man,
Yeah. I think that that's hilarious. And then one of the, like, bits throughout the movie that I think is kind of underappreciated is Stephen Wright.
Oh, I was going to mention that. Yeah,
Stephen Wright as the sleeping guy on the couch,
Yeah.
and then when he wakes up, Stephen Wright's character in this movie I don't think is appreciated nearly to the level, because I don't think that as many people know Stephen Wright.
I was going to say, I don't think people know and appreciate him, even though he's one of the best joke writers of all time. And it's a small role in the movie, but it's so funny, especially if you know him.
I know him. I know him.
And his cadence and everything.
Well, I think that, I mean, now we're going into the comedy aspect of it, but, like, Stephen Wright paved the way, with a lot of his comedy for so many different comedians that, like, dry, like, straight delivery approach. And the 90s were a different time, like, where Comedy Central actually showed comedy.
Yeah.
Like, they would show stand-up comedy.
Now it's just The Office reruns.
Yeah, now it's like, or movies or whatever.
Yeah.
But, like, Comedy Central used to be comedy. And they would show Stephen Wright a lot.
It's a good thing there's gravity, otherwise when birds die, they just stay right up there.
And so, like, growing up in the like, being fully grown up in the 90s and being able to watch Stephen Wright's comedy, like, it makes sense. And that's why I think I appreciate him being in this movie and his character in this movie. I don't think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, kids, youth of today, generation. What generation would it be?
Z.
Generation Z. If you know Stephen Wright, write in. Let us know.
They probably don't. I mean, I know him just as a comedy fan. I love him, but he never chose to be bigger than he was. I think too.
Yeah.
He never like sought out leading roles in movies and sitcoms and stuff.
Well, but I also feel like, and maybe there's a difference between being alive and dead, right? Like
there is. It's breathing.
Yes, but I mean, like Stephen Wright being alive or
Mitch
having
Hedberg
been
being
alive,
dead.
but Mitch Hedberg, like, because Mitch Hedberg, correct me if I'm wrong, like I can't think of any movies that he did.
If he did, he wasn't a leading role. Yeah,
Right.
no, Hedberg dying young, I think, I don't want to say helped him because he's dead, but the legend behind him,
Yeah.
the allure got bigger because he wasn't huge. He was like huge in comedy.
Because like kids today know Mitch Hedberg.
Right.
Like he's all over
And
TikTok.
it's in part because he's passed, and I also think just the point about movies and TV, it's how like if you're a fan of stand-up comedy, you know Stephen Wright because he's one of the greats. But to get into the mainstream,
Yeah.
you have to be on a sitcom or like more people know Ray Romano than Stephen Wright, even though we'd say like we laugh harder at Stephen Wright.
But I just mean like when you compare Stephen Wright and Mitch Hedberg, right? Like their comedy is pretty similar.
Yeah.
Like there are tweaks here and there, of course, as every comedian goes. But like
They're probably the closest.
they are the closest to each other.
Yeah.
And Stephen Wright paved the way for Mitch Hedberg. No doubt no doubt at all. And people know Mitch Hedberg, but they don't know Stephen Wright.
It's probably because he's passed on. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a shame because again, I think Stephen Wright is kind of a genius.
I think Stephen Wright has like a normal life. Like he has like a wife and kids and stuff, and he's just like a normal dude now.
It's good to know that he's still alive. I didn't know that he was still alive. So
I don't know how this reminded me of it when you brought it up, but just one other tidbit that I when I was trying to refresh myself on this movie, I mentioned Dirty Work earlier in this episode. This movie and Dirty Work are being filmed at the same time in Toronto, and the cast shared a hotel. So Bob Saget has an uncredited appearance in Half Baked.
Marijuana is not a drug. I used to suck dick for coke. I seen them.
that's pretty cool.
And then
that hotel would have been awesome to be in.
Seriously, Norm and Dave did a movie together a couple years after Screwed, which was like kind of how Black Sheep is Tommy Boy 2. Screwed was like Dirty Work 2. It just kind of had similar vibes to it, but it didn't take off.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say this movie is buoyed by people enjoying the stoner humor. I don't think it's a good movie. I don't think the number should reflect it being a good movie, but I'm still going to say it's going to be in the 6s, and I'm going to say it's going to be 6.4.
That's what I was going to say.
You could still say
I'll go double 6.4, yeah.
6.6.
That's high.
I mean, again, I think it's
high
jokes.